Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday, the 13th of June, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So we've got England back to work. We've got Northern Ireland back to work. We're just waiting on Scotland and Wales.
Yeah, there's probably some puns somewhere connected to rugby or something around all this, isn't there? But we won't go there. We'll leave the audience to think of them. But
it does sound like an advert for Six Nations, doesn't it?
There's something there. I mean, we're on our 357th episode. I mean, we've had a great interview yesterday with a well overdue Derren Martin joining the podcast from Kappa HPI, and he shares some of his thoughts around what's happening in the wholesale and retail market from a valuation perspective, and shares his view on where that's going both in the short term, medium and long term. Great interview there last week with Owen Edwards from Grant Thornton, who shares some fantastic plans and thoughts and processes that retailers should start to consider in terms of cash flow. And earlier on that week, we had Dash Gupta on the back of a statement and first day of opening. So it's been a busy couple of weeks, hasn't it, Curtis?
It's been a busy time in the virtual Motor Trade Radio studio, hasn't it?
It has, just a bit.
Yeah.
And so you're saying there, showrooms opening, aren't they?
Yeah, so I've got an update from our good friends at the National Franchise Dealers Association. So big shout out to Gabrielle there. So as I said, we know England reopened on the 1st of June. Northern Ireland followed a week later on the 8th of June. So we're waiting on really confirmation on Scotland and Wales. So the state of play at the moment is that dealerships in Scotland are still currently closed, and click and collect services are currently permitted, provided collection does not require entering the showroom. So what we're waiting for really is Scotland to go into phase 2, which will see retailers opening with 800 square metre sales areas. So when phase 2 happens, we don't know. The next lockdown review in Scotland is on the 18th of June. So hopefully we'll know more next week. And unfortunately, the picture is fairly similar in Wales, because the next lockdown review there is on the 19th of June. So until then, dealerships, showrooms are remaining closed, although click and collect is permitted.
I suppose if there is a light at the end of the tunnel for these guys is, although they are missing obviously trading through this period whilst England are trading, and as you say, Northern Ireland there, but there is probably learnings, isn't there? Hopefully there are some learnings and some best practice that both the dealers in Scotland and Wales could be picking up from England and Northern Ireland as they've been open longer. And maybe there is some processes and what's been happening there. Although you never know, because things are changing, that actually all the signage that says 2 metre distances could change, as that's been up for debate in recent days, hasn't it? I mean, everybody's got obviously all the 2 metre distancing signage and directional flooring and things like this, and now there's debates whether 2 metres is the correct distance, but I don't know. It's a debate that we won't get into on this podcast. But
yeah, exactly. And we do know from the interviews we've done with various dealer group bosses that they are talking to each other. So any learnings, any best practices that have been picked up since lockdown was lifted for showrooms in England and Northern Ireland, I'm sure they'll filter through to, as you say, Scotland and Wales.
Definitely. But some of the headlines this week show some of the, what's been happening in the sort of the first days of opening and some of the other activity that's taking place. So it's been a few headlines this week, hasn't there?
Yeah, so the first one comes from Motor Trader, and the headline is "Dealers urged to put processes in place to manage increased sales leads." So this comes from research that eBay Motors Group did on sales leads in the run-up to the opening of showrooms in England on 1st of June, and they found that across their platforms, leads generated increased by 45% in May compared to April. So month on month, sales leads were up 45%. But within that, this is where it gets quite interesting, because email leads in the fortnight before reopening were up 65% year on year, and telephone leads were up 25% over the same period.
I mean, this does lead into, in a minute, when you talk about the next story from JCT 600, but there is that balance at the minute, and again, alluding to what Pauline Edwards was talking about last week around that costs coming into the business relative to the revenue coming into the business. And this is where a lot of the dealers, particularly the sort of AM100, AM200 dealers, those large groups, that they've got a lot of inquiries to get through, isn't there? There's a lot of demand coming through, and as you say, that heavy increase in terms of incoming inquiries, incoming emails into the business, plus what they've got to get through in terms of pre-lockdown and the orders and inquiries that were in place there, and get the vehicle sales back in action, get back in motion again. There's a lot for the retailers to get on with at the minute, and some of them are still on skeleton staff, or they've still got staff on furlough, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. It is a challenge, and the quote from Mark Robinson is very much along the lines of, yes, these leads are coming in, but they need to be managed because there will be fewer walk-ins. They will be reduced because of social distancing measures. So these leads need to be treated really, really seriously, and they need to be acted upon promptly and as efficiently as possible, because that is where the business is going to come from.
And like you say, we're in this period of potential pent-up demand, which we may talk about later on, but it's capitalising now. Whilst those inquiries are coming into the business, whilst consumers are back into the market after being in lockdown for weeks, now's the time that you've got to really maximise those inquiries that are coming into the business, into it. And like you say, it's all coming through that digital platform via email, etc., that they do need to be dealing with them. So again, a lot of work for the retailers to be getting on with.
Yep. So, and the next story ties in quite neatly with this, because it's also from Motor Trader, and the headline is JCT 600 sees record-breaking week for sales inquiries. See, we don't just throw this together, do we, Phil?
Segue there nicely into it. But,
yeah.
And again, it's kind of that feeling that everybody's been talking about. They're talking about that surge in the first week after lockdown. So we know that dealers opened up fully. And I say fully, but the showroom doors opened up on a sales and click and collect environment, but they were up 21% year on year. Now, obviously, we've had 11-12 weeks worth of lockdown, but it's great that immediately within that sort of week of first opening that those sales are up, and they're talking about a record-breaking week for incoming sales inquiries, as you've just alluded to there before from eBay Motors Group, that they're talking about inquiry volumes into the business increasing by 177% compared with the same week last year. Both telephone and digital inquiries were the highest JCT have experienced in a single week. So again, at a time where some of them are in, skeleton staff or reduced staffing levels, you're talking inquiry levels at 177% up compared to the same period last year. So that's a lot, as we were saying before, a lot for them to get through.
Yeah, and also web traffic that doubled in the week compared with how it was looking during the lockdown. And there's a good quote from John Tordorf, CEO of JCT 600, who says, after 2.5 months of dealerships being closed, there's obviously a huge pent-up demand from customers wanting to change their cars.
And it's great. I think it's very positive, isn't it? I think this is a demonstration that, albeit we've had a 2.5 months there, 12 weeks, that there is demand there from the consumers to continue changing their cars, getting a new car, etc. So again, same sentiment seems to be shared across the network in this sort of first week to 10 days of opening the showroom. So great news there. And sticking with this, about this sort of stimulus and incentives, there's a lot of conversation taken place, hasn't there, recently about scrappage schemes, and we broached the conversation both with Dash Gupta and with David Peel on their interviews around the world of scrappage. And there's a story there in the Financial Times that car scrappage scheme to boost sales unlikely, says ministers. And this is a scrappage scheme that they've been talking about to try and add some stimulus to the market. And this is around a £6,000 payment for people who sell their older vehicle and replace them with electric or hybrid cars. And this has come up for debate and question from the network in many ways since this sort of hit the headlines. That is it enough? Does it cover enough of the market? Is it representative for all the brands? And secondly, is there enough demand there from an EV hybrid perspective to stimulate the market? And is there enough cars? Is the question that's come with it. So we knew there was going to be a green agenda, but there's kind of questions whether this is the correct incentive.
Yeah, you're right, because at the beginning of the week, the press coverage suggested that the £6,000 scrappage scheme was pretty much a done deal, and it would come in and it would favour EVs. But this particular report, the FT have spoken to 4 unnamed senior officials within the government, and they've told the FT that while the idea has been considered inside the Treasury, at the moment it is very unlikely. So, all bets are off, really. Meanwhile, you've got the trade associations lobbying for scrappage schemes. The SMMT is calling for a scheme that will actually support the whole market. And this is something that Dash talked about last week. So rather than just favouring EVs and hybrids, it's to stimulate all new car sales. But the lobbying will continue, and we'll wait to see what the government comes back with.
Yeah, and they are lobbying for used cars as well. I mean, that's the other element that both the BVLA and the FLA have included, focusing on that sort of leasing sector. For used vehicles to have some support through the recovery. The IMDA have also been in the media talking about that, to get the market moving, that maybe the government should be thinking about used vehicles as an incentive to get the market moving. So again, a lot to be decided, but I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Curtis, but this is what sort of David Peel said from Peugeot's perspective, from a PSA perspective, is that the risk is the longer the debate goes on, you've got a risk that it delays a consumer's decision, because it adds that air of what if to it, and many of the OEMs want to get out of the blocks, get dealing and get doing some business. And there are conversations there that are saying actually there's some fantastic support. I mean, Paul Hendy from Hendy Group was on the Auto Retail Network this week talking about that. There is for the manufacturers he represents and the business. There's some great support, be it deposit contributions, deferred payments, 0% finance, etc., etc. So the manufacturers sound like they've got straight into the market with some consumer incentives to try and get it stimulated anyway without the scrappage. But again, the government have got a lot of plates that they spin at the minute, but ideally get something moving sooner rather than later that represents the whole of the market.
Yeah, and there is, following on from that, there is an argument that any talk of a scrappage scheme is counterproductive, or could be counterproductive at the moment, because if consumers think there is one coming, they're just going to delay purchases, which is exactly what we don't need at the moment. So if the government's not going to back a scrappage scheme, it needs to come out and say it now, and we'll move on. And as you say, there's a lot of good deals out there, the OEM-led deals.
Exactly. So you are listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer and SoundCloud. Let's hope they don't put too many more on the There's many platforms that we need to go through where we are representative, Curtis?
Absolutely right. So we'll stay with the FT, and the headline here is UK car dealers prepare to slash quarter of staff as pandemic bites. Now, we've included this because this is actually a relatively old story because it came out last Saturday, just after we broadcasted, and it has caused a lot of interest on social media, understandably so, because it does speculate. Actually, in the opening sentence, that car dealers are preparing to cut tens of thousands of jobs across the UK in the coming months as they scale back operations in the face of falling sales because of the coronavirus pandemic. And it's very much on the back of the announcement from Lookers that we've already covered, about 1,500 jobs going there. And it's looking at it very much in the round and speculating that there will be more to follow, and it could be tens of thousands.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's lots of my friends and colleagues, etc., that work in the industry, and it's a very difficult subject to discuss. But I think it is a global issue. It is a general. It's not just the automotive sector. The news headlines have been coming out on a daily basis, haven't they, of late, that redundancies being pushed out into the statements around redundancies being publicised by many companies, not just in the automotive sector and not just in the UK. So it is a very difficult time. I think our interview with Owen from Grant Thornton last week highlighted we are in this period now that the Sybils and the grants and everything else that's been supporting the business sector throughout the lockdown have either been claimed or they're starting to ease. We know there's things happening within the furlough, that you're going now to this new furlough scheme which is more flexible, but actually there's a phased reduction in the support coming out of the government. So this is where costs now start to increase within businesses, and it is, again, we sort of talked about that right on the first story, didn't we, Curtis, around this, getting the staffing levels, the resource levels in to manage the level of business that's coming through the door. And it's a fine balance for many businesses now as we start up, and I think the risk is that there is going to be more redundancies, and we've got as Derren talks about on his valuations, a volatile period of time ahead of us.
Yeah, and there's it's worth looking at this story if you can, because there's a couple of unnamed chief execs from dealer groups quoted in the piece, and one of them says in the best case it's tens of thousands, in the worst case it's more like 150,000 until the furlough scheme is concluded, until the Brexit transition agreement is done. We are all insulated from the reality of the situation. So that's come from one of the chief execs of one of the big dealer groups.
And Sue Robinson from the NFDA, the National Franchise Dealer Association, and she's quite right in a statement there that for 20 years we've talked about people moving away from dealerships, but if you look at the numbers, it hasn't happened. And I think there's been a lot of talk, a lot of speculation, but there is some consolidation. We do accept that consolidation is going to be accelerated as a consequence of COVID-19. It aligns to many of the manufacturers' strategies around that, a more streamlined dealer network, a more profitable dealer network, and I think it was on Dash Gupta's interview around that increased throughput of sales through a smaller dealer network. So, but by consequence of that is fewer people, fewer sites to represent that business. So, I think that is evolution, unfortunately, and I think we are going through that period. But
yeah,
good luck to everybody.
And talking of evolution, the next story from AM headline is Group PSA to sell cars online via virtual showroom platform. So this is an update of what PSA, the PSA brands, so that's Vauxhall, Peugeot, Citroën, and DS, are rolling out now. It's a virtual showroom, and from our understanding, because we were trying to get our heads around this before we came on air, it looks as though this showroom is open from noon until 8 o'clock in the evening, and it enables potential customers, to go online and research one or more of those specific brands and actually interact with someone. So there's a walk around of a vehicle, and it sounds like it is from a remote studio rather than a physical car showroom. But for a way to view a new car, it probably does tick quite a few boxes for potential buyers.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's like we planned the headlines here, Curtis, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Careful. People think we've got a plan behind this. But yeah, I think you're right. I think they do talk about obviously a virtual showroom that is live, and each of the brands will benefit as a separate studio space and train product presenters to deliver the information about each of the individual product ranges. David Marsh there, who's the Group PSA Network Development Director for the UK, he's talking about online retail and remote selling is one of the big growth areas for the automotive sector. With virtual showroom, we are bringing the same tailored showroom environment our customers are used to when visiting our physical retail sites to the comfort of their home. And I suppose there's with some of this, there's an element of the consumers that will want that and will be happy with that. There will be an element of consumers that actually will do a little bit of research there, but they'll still go into a showroom because they'll want that person-to-person interaction in the showroom, albeit in the short term will be slightly different than usual through social distancing. But again, it's a clear indication of the direction that the OEMs are heading with this consumer interaction, going a little bit further than just direct marketing. Yeah, so it's a clear sight for change, isn't it, with this one?
Yeah, very much so. And next story, we've got an update on Trevor Finn.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this recently, didn't we? And he keeps putting out little teasers. So every time he appears in a headline somewhere, there's an extra little bit of tease in his discussion there. And this is from an AM Online. So it's former Pendragon CEO Trevor Finn plans to re-engineer car retail. And we recently sort of talked about this one, but he's added an element of new vehicle distribution in this one as well.
Yeah. This is fascinating. What Trevor is doing is he's releasing details about his new venture on LinkedIn. So this is the second post that he's done, and it does hint that he's very close to formally announcing the launch. So AM have rounded up sort of the key points within the post, but I actually went back to the post, and it is very revealing. I mean, I'll just read this brief extract. He said, I've spent a year forming a team who have the knowledge and experience to drive the digital and resource transformation that's required to re-engineer parts of the industry that aren't functioning efficiently. So the key is there that Trevor's been outside of day-to-day retailing for 18 months now, and he's been able to look a bit more objectively about how it's done, what works, what doesn't work. So he goes on to say, we've been having discussions with a number of parties in relation to used car retailing and new car distribution models. Now, I thought that was particularly interesting. Used car retailing, yes, Trevor's got track record in used car retailing, but talking about new car distribution models. So we wonder what that will be as part of the new business.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously something imminent in there. I mean, he's obviously got something that's ready to go, because he is, like you say, there's continual sort of posts within LinkedIn. He's engaging in discussion as well within those posts on LinkedIn. So he is obviously he's obviously been active for that 12-month, 18-month that he's been out of operation, but he is obviously very, very active and ready to go when he's ready to announce whatever he's doing. And as you say there, he's obviously been in deep conversations with a lot of people that he's known. And as you said there, both in the drive, the digital and the resource transformation is quite an interesting statement. So I think everybody's quite intrigued as to what Trevor is going to do and
Yes.
when it will be. But hopefully we'll get a bit of a scoop on that one.
Yeah, and AM actually had a look on Companies House and discovered that Trevor registered a new business back in October last year called New World Automotive, and the name that the title he's given to the LinkedIn post is The New World. So I think New World will figure prominently in the new business.
That's a hint. That's as big a hint as you're probably going to get into it before the launch. So it's great news. So we've got a bit of something a little bit different this week. So we're heading over to a kind of a bit of an finally, but you found this on LinkedIn, and I know the business, so I know Thurlow Nunn as a business. But Chris Tyler, who is a sales manager at Thurlow Nunn, he's put a post out, hasn't he, and sort of described his first week back at business, and it's quite telling, and it's good to get a view from somebody other than a CEO.
Yeah. I mean, it does follow on neatly from the story we covered on JCT 600, but as you say, this is from Chris Tyler, and it's really his experiences after the first full week of reopening, and he describes how the showroom in Dunstable reopened on Monday the 1st, and there were just two members of staff, himself and Chloe, one of the sales execs there, and he said we had the hope that there were lots of pent-up demand and we would be busy, but no real confirmation until we opened the doors. And they were busy. He says the expectation was set that if we could exceed 30 sales in the month, we could look at bringing back more of the sales staff. So after the first week, he says that it was manic from 8:30 to 4 o'clock each day, he even says on some days they struggled to turn on the radio. So, but he does actually say they took 29 orders in that week. So the ambition was to hopefully exceed 30 sales in a month. So what a great result there for the first week.
Yeah, I mean it showed. I mean these, the guys have been putting a lot of effort in. I mean you see all this going across the network, and these kind of been in the industry myself previously, but it's just a love for the job. They want to get back to work. They want to get selling cars. They want to get back into the showroom, and they want to get back at what they're doing. And speaking from my side of the business with Mannheim, the auctioneers, they're just eager to get something going again, and get back on the roster and get selling some cars. And these guys are the same, and for a salesperson, sales manager, and one sales executive to go in to do that, to do 29 sales in that sort of, is it a week? Yeah, I think
that's Monday to Friday, I think.
29 sales in a week. I mean, great. Hands off to these guys. I mean, fantastic work. As well as and not forgetting, this is all within a social distancing environment as well. So an environment that the consumers aren't used to, and they're not going to be used to either. So it's not like doing 29 sales between a sales manager and a sales executive on a normal week in a normal environment. This is through social distancing as well, and in a reduced day, 8:30 till 4, which is obviously a shorter day than normally would be. So great work, and a true testament to these guys that have got out and done that.
Yeah, and what Chris has said is that it's enabled the group to bring back more people because they were struggling to keep on top of all the sales leads into the business.
Right, it's great. It's great. So, been a week of headlines, and I think this is going to be. There's going to be more of this, isn't there? We'll get to hear when Wales and Scotland open. and what happens there. And you can sort of see this start to sort of increase now as restrictions are lifted and things like this. Keep a close eye on what else is happening. The world of people coming off furlough and the redundancies and businesses. There's a lot going on, but again, great work this week, and there's a lot taking place.
Yeah, and that is it for this week. So you've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for listening. Do join Philip and I again next weekend, and do look out for the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders and analysts. Until then, stay tuned for our special interview with Derren Martin, CAP HBI's head of UK valuations. He's talking about how used car and van values are looking right now, and also his medium to long-term forecast. So do stay tuned for that. So until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. And many thanks again for joining us in the latest, which is now the 13th in a series of special interviews themed around sharing best practices across car retailers to manage their way through the COVID-19 crisis. Previous interviews, as you're aware, have been with people from Sytner's Group's Darren Edwards, Virtue Motors, Robert Forrester, Peugeot UK boss Darren Peel, and Marshall Motors Group Dash Gupta. And they're all available still to stream online from Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, motortraderadio.com and other streaming stations. So over to you, Curtis.
So we're delighted to welcome our special guest today, Derren Martin, head of UK valuations at CAP HPI. So welcome to the show, Derren.
Thank you.
Yeah, we seem to have been quoting you a lot in recent weeks on the Headlines podcast at the weekend. So it's good to finally catch up with you and hear it straight from the horse's mouth now.
Yeah, there's been plenty going on over the last few weeks, so there's always been a lot to talk about. Yeah.
So, I mean, Derren, it's as Curtis has said. I mean, it's great to have you on. It's been far too long, and get you on the podcast. And like I say, with a lot of stuff been going on through this last 12 weeks now, isn't it? We're in the 12th week of lockdown, albeit we're getting a bit of restriction lift. But obviously, there's been plenty to talk about with obviously showrooms in both England and now Northern Ireland now opening again. Although Wales and Scotland remain closed for the time being. So plenty of interest into the state of play regarding the used car values, as you can quite imagine. But perhaps you could start with your take on what has happened through the wholesale market during lockdown with regards to volumes and whether the market shut down completely, really.
So with the lockdown announcement on the 24th of March, we decided that we wouldn't move any values in our products from that time because it was obviously the market was going to completely shut. So we actually saw it slightly earlier than that, really. From about the 16th of March, there were conversion rates dropping, less people buying, and values did drop. So values dropped for a period of time. Then we switched the values, we chose not to move them. During that time, it was interesting to still analyse what data we were getting, and what certainly wasn't shut down completely, as you said, because we were still getting volumes, but we would normally get on wholesale data, so trade to trade, we get around 160 to 170,000 sold trade records per month, which is about 40,000 a week. So 8,000 a day if you break that down. So during that first week of lockdown, which was the week commencing the 30th, we saw about 1,000 records over the whole week. So it was about 2.5% of normal, and very, very low volumes there. And that continued for the first couple of weeks, so into April. And but there were cars selling, so even at 1,000, those really reduced levels, the market was still open, and I think it's testament to the auctions that they were carrying on being busy. We don't get all of our data from the auctions, but at the time it was generally those that were still open. There was some buy it now prices, and there were then throughout the period of lockdown they started to more started to open up their online capabilities. There were more buyers in the market as well, so the volumes did start to increase during that time. We didn't move any values at all during that time, until a certain point when the volumes increased, though.
Now, Derren, during that period, there was plenty of speculation on what impact the lockdown was having on used values. In your view, were prices actually affected during this time? And were there many value movements on CAP Black Book?
Yes, to answer your second bit first, we didn't move any values between the 24th of May and the 24th of March and the 11th of May. We have a live product, so although a lot of subscribers still take monthly products from us, we have a live product, so we're moving values every day. But during that time, because there wasn't enough data and it wasn't reflecting a true market, we didn't move any values for about 6 weeks. But we were still analysing the data and looking into what was happening in the market. And for those first 2 weeks, when, as I said, the volumes were really low, prices really dipped. They dipped to around 80% of cap during that time, just above 80% of cap. But those were generally on lower value cars. The average selling price was below £4,000. It's easier to affect the percentage of cap on those sorts of values. You don't have to move it much in pound note terms to affect the percentage. They were generally cars in poorer condition, and the cars that were being sold were, I guess, people wanting to realise a bit of cash. So they were very low at that time. You could have maybe expected that that values were going to come down dramatically. What we saw after that, though, was a real recovery in prices from those low points, steadily increasing. As the volumes increased, the values increased, and the percentage of cap went steadily up from those low points up in the early 80s to about 96% of cap just before car showrooms reopened, and then looking at sort of 99% of cap now. And bearing in mind that's cars in all conditions, so that's not a direct comparison to clean, because a lot of those cars are in average or below the condition. That's quite a strong performance, so that did definitely improve over the period. So they were affected initially, but we weren't moving any values. It wasn't a true reflection of the market. And then as volumes increased, we started to then move values on cars. From the cars that we moved values from the 11th of May, but that was only on cars over 5 years old, because that was where the majority of the volume was and where we were confident that it was reflecting the market.
So as you say, I mean, it's potentially not a true representation of the market, was it, through that period, because there wasn't true activity taking place to a certain extent then?
No, we thought that the volumes needed to get to around 15% of normal before we'd be confident in moving any values again, and even that would have been obviously very low. But we once we got to that point, and when it got to the 11th of May, volumes were just below 20% of normal. And at that point, we started to move them because we then felt they were more representative of the market. But the movements that were made were minor. They were a lot of things didn't move. Around half of what we looked at over 5 years old didn't move at all. So the prices from March were still representative and still strong for the market, whereas things did move on average. Things that did move, the average movement was about 2%, which is about £150, something like that. So there wasn't a huge reduction. The big reduction was during those first couple of weeks when volumes were really low and not representative.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's a time where people need to take into context the percentage and pound value more than ever, isn't it? It's a real key indicator with what is happening in the market, rather than just taking that percentage as the given figure. That you've got to put it in context of that pound value.
It was definitely the right call not to move values during that time. It wouldn't have been fair for us to do that, and dropping things could have caused a real stir in the market by dropping to where the market actually was at that point. But the market was, as I said, 2.5% of normal. It's not a representative market for us to do that.
And in terms of the dealers, I mean, we're now on the 12th day of the month. You know, we mentioned earlier that potentially there was activity taking place through lockdown, but officially 1st of June was when the dealerships could open again. And you know, What was and what is the view from the dealer been sort of over the last few weeks, and what have you been doing to sort of help them through this as well?
So because we were always getting data, and we've also got retail data that we were analysing as well, and retail values held very firm during that time, that being advertised prices from major portals. So they were holding very firm as well then. But I think for the dealers, they weren't quite sure what was actually happening in the market. So we tried to have as many conversations as we could with small and large dealers. Really, we sort of put ourselves out there as being available to speak to anybody that wanted to talk to us about what was going on. And that was sometimes at board level with some of the big dealer groups, with CEOs, or sometimes it was just with sort of people with their sort of the boots on the ground in the dealers. But yeah, they weren't open, but they were still doing cars for key workers, a lot of them, and there was some online activity as well. And certainly what they were doing was they were still taking orders, or they were taking inquiries. They tended to keep the call centres open even if the actual dealerships were closed. So we were advising on what we were seeing in the market at the time. We were advising on some of those percentages of cap, some of the volumes that we were seeing, looking at the detail behind that as well on specific models if required. Obviously, the customers have specific brands that they wanted to know how they were performing. So we were certainly helping them on that score. We've developed an appraisal app as well, which means that you have less. You can have less physical contact between a customer and a dealership. So you can put your reg. The consumer puts the reg number into the consumer app, into the appraisal app. They then it brings back all of the vehicle details. They can then go around and take photographs of the car, mark down where there's damage, that type of thing. So I think at that time there was obviously a lot of concern that people weren't going to be physically wishing to go to dealership. So we produced the app that meant that you could do a lot of it virtually before you actually, so they didn't have to see your car to appraise the part exchange, basically. So we were helping in that way. That's being trialled at the moment. So there's been a lot of interest in that. And my team certainly were having lots of those conversations and trying to almost sort of keep the market calm on what was happening, and saying that we weren't expecting a big drop-off in values. We did actually think there could be a more of a drop-off than has happened when car showrooms reopened, but it does seem that the pent-up demand has kept values strong. But we were certainly trying to help the industry, and also having those conversations with auction houses as well that were still being active, and the ones that weren't doing the volume, we're sort of reassuring them as well. So there was a lot of two-way conversations, and obviously we want to know what's happening from them as well as them hearing what's happening from our point of view.
Now, Derren, as we record this, there has been some media reports circulating that user values have dropped, which I noticed you challenged on social media. So I guess the big question for listeners to the podcast is, what is happening to car values right now?
Yeah, so we base our values mainly off the wholesale data, off trade data that we see. We obviously do look at retail, but there is a lag between how retail advertised prices react compared to trade transacted ones. And also it's important to note that those retail values are advertised prices, they're not transactional. So when other companies are looking at that, scraping that data, they aren't necessarily reflective of what's happening in the market at the time. Trade always seems to react quicker. And what we've seen some real strength. That first week back, we've spoken to a lot of dealers over the past week as well. They're really, really buoyant with how things are. There's been a lot of pent-up demand from consumers. Some of that because they haven't bought cars over the period when they were looking to, over the last 2 or 3 months. There's also been definitely people buying vehicles because they don't want to go on public transport. And I think one of the government announcements that suggested people shouldn't use public transport was probably just what the car industry needed at the time. So people looking to buy used cars. So there's definitely been a move there. If people can afford it, they have been looking to buy cars during this period. So it's been a really good week for dealers. And with regards to car values, older cars are certainly performing better. The cheaper end is going very well. and we've put some prices up. Some of our values have definitely gone up in those areas. Older German premium cars been in demand. People may be downgrading from a younger vehicle, trying to realise some cash by going to a cheaper, older car. People that haven't necessarily bought a car previously are looking at the lower end as well on smaller city cars. So generally, vehicles, cars on that lower end, cheaper end, performing very well, and a lot of values have gone up or at least stayed level. Very few drops there. At the younger age, so newer, late plater used cars, it's a bit more complicated. There are stocks in the market from March, either unregistered or registered, but without a home to go to because of when the timing of the market lockdown. There were a lot of cars that were built but didn't find a home. So it's very, very I think what we're seeing is a compression of values. We're seeing older ones particularly going up, and we've seen younger cars perhaps going down slightly in value, but only slightly.
So in terms of data, I mean, this you mentioned earlier about obviously that retail and wholesale market, and putting my Cox Automotive head on here, but over in the US, they obviously they didn't do a full lockdown. Everything went online, but obviously the showrooms didn't shut down on a US fully because it was done state by state. But they commented that the retail was down about 1 to 1.5%, but the trade wholesale prices had dropped sort of 10 to 12%. And recently we carried a survey out with the dealer network where the majority of the dealers had indicated that they were going to hold firm on retail prices until either one, they saw what the market was doing and the data from the market, or two, they were just going to hold firm, because they didn't see a view that retail prices should necessarily drop because the market has been in freeze since the 23rd of March, essentially, in most cases. But what would you say is your view in terms of that retail and wholesale prices reacting the same or differently in the current market?
It's more key than ever that they are, more apparent than ever that they're reacting differently at the moment. And we were, throughout the lockdown period, the conversations we were having, we were encouraging people to hold on to price, not to reduce. We weren't the only ones saying that, but obviously we were encouraging, treat the day you open as the one day after the day you shut, basically, rather than however long that period was. So it's very important that they held on price, and that's what's been evident in all of the retail pricing data. Whereas on the trade side, there have been ebbs and flows, demand and supply, and it reacts very differently there. And they've also, what we've definitely seen is that there are wholesale vendors who had very different strategies on selling. You've had ones that started selling at low prices, probably below the market, and we were kind of discussing with them whether that was the right thing to do. And then they've been putting their prices up as demand increased. There were others that were holding price from March and keeping them, trying to keep the prices as strong as possible and really holding out. And that's what we've seen in those percentage of cap values that I mentioned earlier, that they have been increasing through this period. So, but it's been, I would say, more volatile on the trade side than it is on the retail side. And retail always acts with a lag. And as I say, they're not transactional prices generally that other companies are reviewing. We do review that as well, and we've seen little movement there, but we have seen movement in trade. I do think that retail values could potentially go up, though. If trade prices go up, then as dealers try and maintain their margin, retail values could go up as well. But again, there could be a bit of a lag for that.
Now, Derren, we've been talking purely about cars so far. So can you share your views on what's happening to LCV values, especially as anecdotally demand for used LCVs appears to be holding up, especially as a result of demand for delivery services?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen some real strength in the LCV market, and it's been off the back of the deliveries, definitely. You've had people that have used their government grants to go out and buy vans. You're seeing now that the small shops, the corner shops and things like that didn't use do anything, even consider doing deliveries now, advertising that they will deliver. So the LCV market has been very strong, and we're seeing their values. We didn't move any values in April or in May. So going into June's book, as people still call it, although there isn't a physical book, we didn't adjust LCV values. We are going to be adjusting them this month, and it generally at the moment we still got some time to go, because obviously we're only on the 12th of June, but they are looking very strong, and older ones in particular looking strong. Some of the newer ones more level really, so but certainly not heading down in value there. The only probably caveat to that would be something like minibuses, where people have realised, well, minibuses are struggling in value because they don't really fit with social distancing at the moment. You can't really use them, so it's more difficult in that area. But certainly for panel vans, they've been very, very strong, and we would expect them probably going forward to be slightly stronger than car values.
I mean, two questions here really, and one of them being on the back of your webinar this week, and really one of them around that sort of rental leasing market, because a lot of people are asking questions around the rental and lease market, particularly with what's happened over in the US. That isn't anything, they initially thought that was going to be impacting the UK, and it isn't. But what's your view on that rental market at the minute, the leasing rental market, and obviously because that has a direct influence on the wholesale market, and in terms of the values, in terms of that strength and weakness, through the market, how long do you think that could last for, with from the current position?
I think that at the moment that there are issues with transportation, so all the vehicles can't get through, and that's helping the strength. So what you've got at the moment is you've got demand, but you've got supply issues. So demand is outweighing supply. So some of those rental and leasing companies, they're not necessarily getting the vehicles through quick enough to be able to sell them. From the conversations we've had, and again we have a lot of conversations with the rental and leasing companies, they're being very careful. There seems to be a desire not to liquidate stock, so that they are not necessarily dripping them into the market, but they're certainly phasing them to come back, and being very careful. And a lot of them are trying to hold on price as well to make sure that the market doesn't drop, which is very important for the industry as well. So I think there's been quite a responsible attitude there. We don't see any particular issues unless people suddenly start thinking, well, it's really strong at the moment, let's try and realise some cash because it could come down. But I don't think the transport infrastructure would allow that to happen, either going into defleet centres and coming out of defleet centres. There's just not the infrastructure there, and it's a bit chicken and egg with furloughing as well, or unfurloughing people. Do you unfurlough when the market picks up, and will the market pick up if people are still furloughed, because there aren't the people out there to do the transporting and that type of thing. So I think at the moment it's as I say, everyone's being pretty responsible. How long will the current strength last for? Obviously it won't last forever. We are in a bit of a bubble at the moment, we think, where values are strong because there's pent-up demand. Pent-up demand won't be there forever, because that's obviously pent up from 3 months of inactivity, and that will get realised once those cars are all those orders are realised and delivered. There will also be there are people, as I said earlier, buying because they don't want to go on public transport, and that won't last forever either. And going forward, unfortunately, there are going to be redundancies, and we're already starting to see that in the market, and people will become more prudent and more careful. So, but that could still lead to a strong used car market, but I think it will potentially be stronger at the lower end again, where people are downsizing and being very careful with what they buy. Maybe and we already saw this before all of this COVID-19, but maybe people realise that their second car, or even their third car, if they've got older kids, doesn't need to be a big car. They can have one reasonable size, maybe SUV. Their second car can be a smaller car for those local journeys, and that's now a lot more acceptable to do that. Maybe an EV or a smaller sort of city car, something like that. So I think it will. The strength is here for now, but I think everybody is wary that it won't last beyond, I would say, a few weeks.
So I suppose, sorry, just on that. So I suppose it's just a case of there is caution ahead. There's
Yeah,
particularly, I mean, again, your webinar this week, I think it's about this live versus monthly values, and that things can be moving fairly swiftly at the minute, and the days of being able to relax and take it's gonna be there for some time. There is stability. I think you were warning that there is potential volatility ahead, and that keeping an eye.
Volatility is the worst. Yeah, volatility, but in either direction. So if prices could go up, volatile doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come down. But I think you've talked as well about sort of W-shaped recoveries and things like that, and that is what you've got to expect, really, that prices could ebb and flow over a period of time, and we've seen that already this month. And we're only into day 12 of it, and you can see values could potentially move in different directions over the coming weeks. So we have a live product and we have a monthly product, but for me, live has got to be the way forward. You need to know what's happening today. Once the monthly values come out, they could be out of date within a few days. So it's really important to keep an eye on what's happening in the here and now. And the way we work with editors who have worked in the industry, who have been working at dealerships, they've worked for remarketers. They're looking at the data over a period of time. They're then looking at the most recent data and deciding what the real true picture is. And now that those volumes have gone up, and last week the volumes were around almost 50% of what you'd expect normally at this time of year. And I think this week, once we finish the week off, I think they'll be at 75 or 80% of what you'd expect normally. The auctions have adapted really well to going online. Other remarketers, we don't just get all of our data from auction, we get plenty from elsewhere. They are also now very adept at online, and also the buyers are becoming more and more used to buying online as well. So with the volumes increasing, but that supply demand dynamic, and it's all about supply and demand. And with the transport network being a little bit difficult as well, it will be really interesting to see which way values move.
And finally, Derren, and really following up on that point, can you just dig a little deeper and give us your take on how used values will perform in the medium to longer term?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work on this at CAP HPI, and we've we've had our consultants involved, our forecast team involved, and our current values team involved, and had lots of conversations over the last few weeks and months. And obviously we've never been in a situation like this before. This is new to everybody. We are experts, but we're also this is new to us. We look back at what happened in 2008 and 2009, and we quickly came to the conclusion that this is very different to them. And we don't expect values to come tumbling down as they did in 2008, and then they recovered in 2009. We do think there will be more pressure on car values this year, although there will be shortages in the market because of factory closures and then slowing getting them back up to full volumes. We also think that there will be the economic impact, unfortunately unemployment impact as well, and that always has a direct correlation with what happens to used car values. So we do think they'll be under more pressure than they would have otherwise been, but that isn't too dramatic, so it'll be slightly below where we expected them to be. We think that will last, but that will maybe kick in towards the end of this year, last for a bit of next year. Obviously you've got cars that were extended by leasing companies. They will come back. They've got to come back at some point. So PCPs being extended, that type of thing. So when that will come back. But on the plus side, we think that for people setting 3-year values, that our 3-year forecast will be relatively unchanged, we think, because we think there will be a recovery in 3 years' time. We could be in for a difficult year or so, but after that, we do actually think that the volume reductions from lack of registrations this year will actually lead to a strong market in 3 years' time. So if companies are writing PCP business now, that could be quite good news. But we will be reviewing our forecast in depth over the next month or so. It obviously takes a while, and we need the market to almost settle down a little bit now to see what the starting point of those values truly is.
I mean, Fantastic, Derren. I mean, thank you for coming on. And I think really just to sort of summarise there, we are in a period of volatility, as you said, and as you clearly said, that's increases and decreases. So it's not necessarily volatility in terms of a negative, but there are increases and decreases. That there are no previous learnings with that. I think that's been apparent across everybody putting out at the minute. I think we're in it's been classed as people referencing as a new norm. I think there's a lot of learnings, a lot of collaborations, a lot of discussions, and I think from what you're saying there is that that you're there to help the retailers through this, and that retail and trade is the area that needs to be we're looking at more than ever. And as you've made on the previous bit there, that live is really, you can't rely on the monthly, because things can change swiftly at the minute as people's strategies change and the market changes in terms of a supply and demand. The minute we're in a state of demand is currently outstripping supply, but that could suddenly switch where the supply and demand balance could switch very quickly in the coming weeks.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the important things are live values. Keep a very close eye on live values, and hold your nerve. Phase any sort of defleets. Hold your nerve on price, and it will stay stronger for longer if those things happen. But yeah, there's potential volatility over the coming weeks and even months. But yeah, we're definitely there to help and to have conversations and sharing of intel with dealers and any remarketers and anyone else in the market, without a doubt.
Well, Derren, many thanks for a timely update on how used values are performing. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. You've been listening to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Please like and share on social media, as it's important during these times for the dealer community to work together and share experiences and best practices. Many thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. Philip and I will be back with the industry headlines on Saturday, but do watch out for more special podcast interviews as we work through this crisis. Until next time, stay safe and stay well.